There's a trope called the Cuckoo Lander was right, where a person who seems to be crazy makes some weird claim that is automatically dismissed because the person seems irrational, but turns out to be right by the end of the show. A problematic variant of this trope that I've noticed is what I call, surprise, she's not hysterical, where there's a marginalized character acting irrational, and the audience is sympathetic to the more privileged character who points out all the flaws in the marginalized character's rationale, only to have the plot twist where the marginalized character turns out to have been actually right. The revelation doesn't lead to more respect for the marginalized character, however, because they are still portrayed as irrational. It's more like, hey, isn't it weird how they turned out to be correct despite being entirely silly? While possibly an attempt to be respectful toward less privileged demographics, it ends up just reinforcing stereotypes about their purportedly irrational mindsets. The female version was on the Dexter episode Everything is Illuminated, as well as the Lost episode Raised by Another, and the black version was on the sitcom Til Death episode A Raisinette in the Sun. Plot of the Dexter episode Everything is Illuminated involves Lumen trying to hunt down a rapist in Dexter's vigilante style. She revisits the bar she went to when she was first spotted by the rapists, and she finds a man named Dan she believes to be one of them. She tries to kill him but freaks out at the blood and calls Dexter for assistance. Dexter is annoyed he has to worry about her, and he berates her for not showing the same level of care he makes sure to do as per the code of Harry. He becomes agitated because it looks like Lumen didn't have enough evidence to be sure Dan was indeed one of the rapists. She says she has a feeling that it's him, and that he has the same distinctive smell, which to me just sounds like that of any normal smelly guy.
You shot someone based on a feeling and an odor.
They find Dan as he tries to escape, but he pleads he's an innocent victim. Dexter finds Dan's wallet and shows that he's a family man and a dentist. Far too wholesome to be a serial killer/rapist. Lumen is cast as a hysterical woman, viciously torturing an innocent man because her PTSD makes her think that a random sweaty guy is someone completely different. Dexter saves Dan, taking Lumen from the room to rant at her, only to then overhear the sweaty dentist calling his rapist buddies to warn them. Lumen turns out to have been right, but not for any good reason. There is such disrespect of Lumen's investigative abilities that it comes off as more of a miracle she happened to have attacked the right guy than a reveal that she's any better at this than Dexter gives her credit for. The only thing Lumen has to go on is a feeling and a rather generic smell. Dexter emphasizes the fact that she was wearing a blindfold during the attack. She couldn't see the guy, she couldn't recognize the voice, but she still holds on to the irrational belief that she can nab the right guy through a feeling and a smell. This disrespect is in contrast to the episode Love American Style in Dexter Season 1, where they had the guy who was attacked by the ice truck killer, and all he had to go on was the clicking sound made by a lozenge. It didn't help the cops identify the ice truck killer, but his intel was completely respected by the show. If I could rewrite Everything is Illuminated, I'd have Lumen's feelings shown as legitimate if fallible evidence, with some flashbacks to show similarities between Dan and the unseen rapist, such as a distinctive gait and turns of phrase. Maybe he could have a certain way of knuckle cracking. You know, just something to give her some legitimacy, even if there's still reason to doubt her judgment that the guy is worth killing. The Lost episode Raised by Another involves Claire becoming convinced that someone is trying to hurt her unborn baby after having a series of nightmares. These nightmares are related to the mythology of the show with black and white imagery, but appear as mainly just abstract dream images. One such nightmare ends with her finding her cradle filled with blood, which causes her to wake up screaming. She finds blood on her hands, which according to Jack is from the stress causing her to dig her fingernails into her palms. But she becomes convinced that the nightmare was real. When she wakes up screaming after seeing a man inject a syringe into her stomach, she reports that a man literally attacked her. As Jack is our de facto protagonist, we identify with him as he tries to convince her that she's hallucinating, and that there's no need to cause a fuss, and less need to scare people away from the caves when they're so much safer than the beach. Hurley decides it's important to get to know the survivors, and even if we don't believe hysterical Claire, it seems like a reasonable idea, so Hurley's endeavor isn't questioned. On the other hand, we're supposed to feel annoyed when he repeats Claire's story and convinces a woman not to move to the caves.
I am so not moving to the rape caves.
Then, of course, Hurley compares the list he made to the plane's manifest, and delivers the twist that one of the people he interviewed wasn't on the plane. Claire's fears are suddenly legitimized as the other man, Ethan Rahm, it's an anagram, closes in on her, Except they really aren't. Claire is constantly portrayed as irrational throughout the episode. While she must have been correctly remembering Ethan injecting something into her, as we learn in the next season, there really is no reason for the viewer to trust she's not misinterpreting hallucinations. This stems primarily from her baseless assumption that the dream in which Locke's eyes change to opaque black and white is real. Even taking the show's mythology into account, there's no reason to believe that. While the monster or the island or something could be influencing her dreams, there's nothing to indicate that its events would be literally true. If she's got injuries on her hands, the blood clearly didn't come from the dream. She embodies the image of the hysterical woman with her screaming and illogical behavior, which is something the character can't really get away from even if she turns out to have been right, because we're still right to mistrust her and identify with the rational male character. The Til Death episode A Raisinette in the Sun is the racial version of this trope. It involves the white Eddie regretting sticking up for his black friend Kenny against apparent racism, when it looks like Kenny's made a serious overreaction. Kenny tries to order snack food at a movie theater, but the white cashier ignores him to get the order of a white guy behind him in line. Kenny complains to Eddie, who angrily complains to the manager and tells him that they're boycotting the place. The manager explains that Kenny was taking a long time to order, and the man behind him was having trouble standing. So the cashier was perfectly justified in her actions. At this point, Eddie's convinced, and spends the remainder of the episode trying to show Kenny that he's overreacting.
You have no idea what black people go through, do you?
You know what? You're right. I don't. But I know what it's like to stand behind you in line when you order.
Finally, Kenny gets convinced when some black friends point out that he does take a long time to order, and they return to the theater. Eddie apologizes to the cashier, who makes some cheerfully racist comment.
Well, you're very sweet, and I sure hope you'll forgive me.
Oh, of course. I don't have a problem with you. My problem is with the coloreds.
And a disappointed Eddie yells for Kenny that they need to go after all. Again, Kenny is shown to ultimately be right, but in a way that still portrays him as irrational. Surprise! He's not hysterical! Yes, the cashier turns out to be racist, but Kenny had no good way of knowing that. His accusation of racism can easily be interpreted as misunderstanding, and there is nothing to suggest he saw some true indication of racism. There is a whole race element to the plot, which depicts black people as irrationally inclined to believe white people are racist, which is in itself a racist stereotype perpetuated by the episode. The media makes a big deal about quibbles about grammar, where some black people get offended by some words that may be interpreted as racist, but often have no such etymological origin, such as saying black hole should be white hole, despite both being valid astronomical terms relating to visibility. So there's a perception of black people by white people as constantly looking to be offended. This ignores the legitimate experiences of black people, who often have to deal with racism that white people do not experience or notice when they perpetuate, leading to a skewed perspective. In Surprise, She's Not Hysterical, plots depict marginalized individuals as behaving irrationally, only to use a reveal that they're actually right as a plot twist. These plots end up not respecting the marginalized character, because even if they're right, they ultimately have no good reason to be. Even if they're right, it makes more sense to side with the privileged character, because they are more rational. While I suspect it's often an attempt to depict the marginalized character as better than the more privileged folks give them credit for, this ultimately plays into classic prejudice and serves to perpetuate it.